Welcome to Thursday's lesson in the book of Galatians. I hope that you're enjoying this study. You know what? I'm enjoying this study. Now, I've taught the book of Galatians several times in the past, and it's a book that just blesses. You know, the whole theme of the book of Galatians is going from bondage into freedom. But we've been looking at the timeline of the Apostle Paul's life. And so join with me now again in Galatians, the first chapter, verse number 18. Now, what's happened so far? Paul has told us about his life before Christ. Then he told us about how God was forming him in his mother's womb. And then we talked about how the Apostle Paul went into the wilderness in Arabia, and he was there for 3 years receiving a revelation from the Lord Jesus himself. We talked about how the wilderness is a good place. It's a place of revelation. It's a place of solidifying the call of God into your life. Now, verse number 18 says this, "Then 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem, and I became acquainted with Cephas, and stayed with him 15 days. Now, let me just say this, and I was just reminded of this. The Apostle Paul, after he got saved, just a few days after he got saved, what did he do? He began to proclaim Jesus. And then it was after that he went to Arabia for 3 years. You know, it's very important that people, after they become believers, that they begin to proclaim Jesus to the people that are around them. Why is that? Because it solidifies their relationship with Jesus. You know, when you're talking about Jesus did this for me, and he did that for me, and he did this for me, you know what happens? It becomes solid on the inside of you. Did you know that most people are led to the Lord by people who have been saved less than 2 years? Wow. That's probably shouldn't be that way, but that's what the statistics tell us. Now, going back to verse number 18, he says, then 3 years later, what happens? Paul comes from the wilderness, goes back to Damascus. He hangs out in Damascus for 3 more years. Now, what's happening? He's being discipled. He's being formed into the ministry that God has for him. And then he says, 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas and stay with him 15 days. Now, what are we? We are over 6 years into Paul's conversion. Now, Paul decides that he needs to go to Jerusalem. Now, keep in your mind, at this time, Jerusalem is the center of the church. It's where the church started. It's the epicenter of the church. And why did he go to Jerusalem? Did he say, well, you know, I think I'm going to go hang out on the Mount of Olives, or I'm going to walk the street that Jesus walked on? No, he wasn't a tourist. Paul went to Jerusalem, and by the way, Paul was very acquainted with Jerusalem already. Paul went to Jerusalem for this one purpose. He wanted to get acquainted with Cephas. Now, who is Cephas? You might be thinking, well, I read my Bible. I don't ever remember a Cephas. Well, Cephas is the Apostle Peter. I don't know why the New American Standard translates it as Cephas. I don't know. You have to ask those guys that question. He went to get acquainted with Peter. Now, who's Peter? Peter is one of the leaders in the church in Jerusalem. He's not the only leader. You know, people say, well, he was the pastor of the church of Jerusalem. No, there were many pastors in the church of Jerusalem. There were many apostles in the church of Jerusalem. There were many prophets there. There were many teachers there. There were many evangelists there. But the Apostle Paul wants to go and get acquainted with Peter. And so what does it say? That he stayed with Peter for 15 days. How many of you know that if you stay with somebody for 15 days, you're getting to know them? You know, all the newness is wore off, and all of a sudden you are getting to really know the person that you're staying with. And that's why Paul went to Jerusalem. He went to Jerusalem to get to know this man, Peter. Now, verse number 19 says this, "But I did not see any other apostles except for James, the Lord's brother." What's Paul saying? He said, I didn't go hang out with a whole bunch of guys. I just wanted to hang out with Peter. Just Peter and me. We got a good thing going. Just Peter. He did say, well, you know what? I do remember that I saw James, the brother of Jesus. But he said, I just went to get to know Peter. Now, verse number 20. "Now, in what I am writing to you, I assure you before God that I am not lying." What's the Apostle Paul doing? He's doing a couple things here. First of all, he's bringing to them an assurance that he's not telling a story. He's not lying about what happened. You know, one thing that amazes me sometimes is preachers who tell lies. And then they justify it and say, well, you know, I was just joking or something like that. Well, you know what? The Apostle Paul wanted to make sure that the Galatians understood, that they understood that Paul was not telling a story. He's not making something up, but that the Apostle Paul actually spent 15 days with Peter alone. His whole story here. He's not making it up. Now, what else is he doing? Well, he is doing this so that the Galatians would have the assurance that what they are hearing and what they are reading from the Apostle Paul is absolute truth. You see, one of the things that Paul was doing for the Galatians is he was bringing them to truth. And what was the truth? Well, part of the truth that Paul was bringing is that no longer is the law needed to be righteous before God. And so what is Paul saying? I went to the very head of the church, or one of the heads of the church. I sat with Peter. It's the same Peter that came and caused trouble here. He said, I went and talked to Peter. I got to know Peter. I know who Peter is. And so Paul was telling these Galatians, guys, what I'm saying to you is solid. It's not something that's made up. Thank you for watching today. Join us again tomorrow as we continue our study in the book of Galatians.